Hello, I'm Yafa Luria, and I'm going to talk to you about the easiest ways to motivate your ADHD child or teen. You may be skeptical at first, but I'm not going to teach you anything that you can't do yourself if you're ready to take this on. I'm pretty much an open book, so I'll reveal some of the things that I do to make connecting with an ADHD child easier for parents. And keep in mind that if you're really struggling, there's always help. You don't have to do this alone. That's a fantasy that someone made up. I'm here to help you. So let's get started. Let me tell you a bit about me. So I was diagnosed in 1980 when I was 23. I was one of the first adults to be diagnosed at a time when experts were just beginning to realize that ADHD didn't end at adolescence. I and several other young adults were on a panel to teach doctors and therapists about ADHD in adults. And by the way, at that time, it wasn't called ADHD. Back in 1980, it was called minimal brain dysfunction. So this is where people usually gasp or cringe when I mention this, but honestly, I was relieved. I thought what I had was Margit, which was my name at the time. By 23, I had been called lazy, unmotivated, annoying, loud, clumsy, overactive, bad, irritating, underachieving, mean, rude, mouthy, and a bunch of other terms. So I thought this was me. I thought I was like this and I'd always be like this. I thought there was nothing I could do about it, and I felt pretty helpless. So when I found out that there was something going on with my brain, I knew it wasn't me, and I knew that I could change somehow. Let me just say that I'm not advocating medication here, but for me, it was a revelation. Like all of a sudden, I could do things that I had only dreamed of doing. When medication is the right fit, you should feel like a better version of yourself. So if your kids don't feel better about themselves on medication, it may not be the best fit. So after graduate school, I became a teacher and later a school counselor. And I worked in both private and public schools for 30 years, working with special ed kids, gifted education, and everything in between. I've worked with first grade through college level students, but I spent most of my time working with middle and high school students. And then I started this business, which is now called BlockedtoBrilliant, in 2006. And I've been working with families with ADHD kids since then. I work with the families because just working with the kids and not with the parents also just doesn't get me or you lasting results. Parents are the leaders in a family, and if the leaders aren't involved in making changes, no real change can occur. In fact, the child doesn't even have to be involved in the coaching as long as the parents are in. It's way, way, way easier for ADHD kids to experience success when their parents are experiencing success. So, what is successful ADHD parenting? I have a really simple definition, and we're going to take care of a chunk of that in today's seminar. So, your job is to learn over time what motivates your child or teen, teach it to him or her so that he or she can be successful in adulthood. That's really what it's about. You become a teacher for your child. Now, for me, success in adulthood means that you're capable of giving and receiving love, you're contributing to the world in a positive way, and you are fully self-supporting financially. So, what gets in the way of your success as parents? So, the first thing is fear. There's a lot of fear around an ADHD diagnosis. I'm hoping to change that And I'm hoping that someday the doctor will say to a parent or to parents, your child has ADHD, and the parents will be like, oh my gosh, this is like the best news ever. That's my goal. But right now, there's a lot of fear around it because there are stories about medication and what it's like in school and what the future is like. There's all kinds of stories around it. So fear can get in the way of your success, because if you're operating on fear, if you're making decisions based on fear, those aren't necessarily the best decisions for your child. Okay, that's the first one. The second one is that people are constantly badgering parents of ADHD kids, like, oh my gosh, your child should be on medication, or oh my gosh, don't you dare put your child on medication, or your child needs a different school, when they don't even know your child or the school. It could be you're not strict enough or you're too strict. I mean, there's always something that people have an opinion about that they're totally willing to share with you. And I get that. It's exhausting. The third thing is that executive function issues are really complicated. So executive functions are, these are brain functions. They occur in the front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. And they're things that you would expect actually somebody like an executive assistant to carry out. So they're goal setting, organization, time management, which is the hardest for people with ADHD. Not just setting the goals, but setting out a plan to reach those goals, breaking tasks into smaller pieces, even understanding the results of decisions that you make or actions that you take. So there are many executive functions. And what's also complicated is that they occur to varying degrees in each person. So you can't necessarily do what your neighbor does with their ADHD kid and think that it's going to work with your kid. And that's very frustrating and very confusing and very discouraging. Another thing is that people don't talk about the emotional issues of an ADHD child or teen. The fact that ADHD students are the only students in a school that are told that what they're doing is wrong and they have to change, nobody talks about that and nobody thinks about that. But if you do think about it, you know, I taught English as a second language. I taught special ed. People for whom English is a second language, people who are in special ed, nobody says to them, you know, everything that you are is wrong and you have to become someone else. Nobody says that. Everybody works with those people to adapt. But with kids with ADHD, people just get, you know, teachers and school staff just get frustrated with them. Even other students get frustrated with them. And we are led to believe that we're troublemakers, that we're resistant, that we're lazy. That doesn't happen with other groups of students in schools. So there are a slew of emotional issues that go along with ADHD just by virtue of us living in the world and not living isolated. And that means that kids can feel hurt and underappreciated often. And that is really tough to deal with as a parent. Do you make this move, you know, as far as, do you take on this new role? Do you take on this new activity or this new strategy, or don't you? Will it hurt your child or will it help your child? So there's a lot going on as a parent that where it feels like the decisions you make are monumental. And that's not always true with other groups of kids and their parents. Okay, so let's talk about motivation. You know, there was a time when I never would talk about motivation, and my justification for it was, oh, well, motivation is an inside job. It's the kid has to be motivated. But I started working with a classroom full of kids that had oppositional defiant disorder, plus ADHD, plus some had bipolar disorder. So there were a lot of diagnoses at the same time, but all of them had oppositional defiant disorder. And I learned that I could motivate them. And when I could motivate them, I learned that I could motivate anybody. And so that's my background coming to you. This isn't hype. These are actually things that I tried out with kids who are the least motivated. So physical health is really key to brain health. The first one is good sleep. Sometimes in the classroom, a child would fall asleep, and it was a self-contained classroom. And sometimes we would wake him or her up, but sometimes we would let him or her sleep, because if this was a safe place to sleep, that was a good sign. So good sleep is really important. It's when your body rejuvenates itself, your brain resets and rejuvenates itself. That is the number one thing to be concerned with. So if your child isn't getting good sleep, that's something to look into first, because a lot of the symptoms or behaviors that have negative implications will be rectified by taking care of the sleep. So for instance, it's easier to focus when you've had good sleep. It's easier to be motivated when you've had good sleep. It's easier to think when you've had good sleep. Exercise is also really important. There are studies showing that exercise can, with some kids, can actually replace medication. And hiking is cited as the best activity for ADHD kids because we respond well to nature and we respond to exercise. So hiking seems to be a number one activity. And you can do this even in the snow. Wherever you live, you can actually be hiking. The third one is proper nutrition at home. So it's really hard to manage your child's nutrition when they're not at home. But at home, that's your place. And so you have some control over that, some say in it. And that's for everyone in the family. None of these suggestions are bad for anybody in your family. There's really no reason you can't apply them across the board. And you can, not to take away desserts completely, for instance, donuts, ice cream, candy, but you can make those special occasions where you go someplace to enjoy those treats. So for motivation and focus, for sure, you want them to have protein. Omega-3s are vitamins. They come in capsule form. They can come in a more digestible or swallowable form for your kids that may have issues with digestion or with swallowing pills. And you want to make sure their blood sugar is level. And by that, I mean, you want to make sure that there's a steady intake of food that will keep their blood sugar level. I'm not talking about people with diabetes or hypoglycemia where the blood sugar levels deviate wildly, but I am talking about just your average person who may not be getting enough nutrition to keep their focus steady. The breakfast, lunch, and dinner, 3 meals a day approach may not work for your ADHD child, regardless of whether they're on medication or not, because if their blood sugar level drops, for instance, right before dinner when they're doing their homework, they may not be able to concentrate on their homework. Before homework or a chore, for instance, or an important task, you want to give your child protein and water. So you're going to hydrate your child with water, and you're going to give your child protein, which helps with focus. Carbs do not help with focus. Carbs help with calming a child down, but they have a sedative effect. In addition to water, if you're interested in making sure they get electrolytes, I would stop using all those electrolyte drinks that have God knows what in them, because I just think they're horrible. But I do recommend Ultima Replenisher. They do not pay me to endorse them. I wish they would, because I endorse them all the time. This is a powder. It is naturally sweetened with a plant, although sugarcane is a plant. I give you that. But they're naturally sweetened. They're not overly sugary. They sweeten the water, and they provide electrolytes without all the extra chemicals and food coloring and just, I don't know. There's some, if you look at a bottle of one of those things like Gatorade, there's some stuff in there like wood resin. I mean, no. The fifth thing is you want to make sure that your child has a treatment plan. So a lot of times how ADHD is handled is a child is put on medication, or there's a diet change. No gluten, no sugar, no dairy type of thing is pretty common. And only 1 or 2 things are done to help the child. What ADHD requires is a treatment plan. So that is several strategies put into play at once. I look at it like a safety net. So if you have a safety net and it's got 2 ropes, let's say those ropes are, I'm going to change their diet and I'm going to put them on medication. Let's say those are the 2 ropes. That's not a safety net. That's 2 ropes. They're not even held together in any safe way. So the idea is that you want to create a safety net for your child. And those ropes could be medication, could be a change in diet, could be good sleep, could be exercise, could be essential oils. It could be coaching. It could be, I just thought of it and then I forgot it. It could be any of those things put together. And I like to have, for myself, I like to have as many ropes as possible, partly because I see the image of a safety net, but also because not everything works every time for someone with ADHD. And I want options. I want to know that I have, let's say, 10 things that I can choose from that will help motivate me. If I only have 3 things going on, that puts me at risk. For the way I look at myself, I'm at risk if I only have 3 strategies. So I want as many strategies as possible. And the other strategy I was going to talk about that I forgot was having a support team. The support team could be a tutor, could be, like I said, a coach, could be somebody that's like a study buddy, somebody that your child, for instance, with math, maybe maybe your child and another child always get together either in person at a library or even over Skype, and they always do their math together. Some sort of support like that to help with motivation. Emotional discomfort is a huge distraction. And so we want to make sure that our children are as comfortable as possible, not in the sense of being coddled or babied, but we want to make sure that the discomfort is taken away. So no put downs, criticism, sarcasm, teasing. And this refers mostly to siblings, but it can also refer to us parents, because sometimes we get caught up in the routine of the frustration of parenting an ADHD child. So we might say, innocently enough, did you get your chores done? And then the next moment we say, why am I even asking you? Of course you didn't get them done. So in our frustration, we can we can put down our child without knowing it and without meaning it. What's important to know is that ADHD kids are very sensitive, and some of those jabs we will remember. And we will probably internalize them not as you being a bad parent, but as us being a bad kid. So it's really important to watch the language that you use with your children. Another obvious discomfort can be if your child's experiencing fear or anxiety. Now that can be fear of fear of getting a failing grade, or it could be full-on anxiety about school, about just being alive. Like there is generalized anxiety disorder, which doesn't necessarily have a source, except that it's, another brain chemical thing. Same with sadness or depression. If your child is sad, like a pet dies, or they have to move, those are going to be distractions for your child. And until those distractions are taken care of, it's going to be really hard to motivate your child, like really hard. Because emotional discomfort usually, the attention that is paid to a child's own emotional discomfort usually precludes any kind of motivation or focus. So if your child is sad or depressed or anxious or fearful, they're going to be trying to maintain that, to keep that at a small enough level so that it doesn't overwhelm them. And they're going to be, all their focus and motivation and attention is going to be on that. So it's going to be really hard to get them to clean the house or to do homework. In fact, when I hear of a child who absolutely refuses to do something, like homework or like chores, like just refuses, will not hear of it in any way, it's usually, it turns out that they have anxiety or depression. Now, this can be that I ask about it, like, has your child ever been diagnosed with anxiety or depression? And I find out they have been. Or I suggest that they go to a pediatrician and have it checked out, and then there's a diagnosis. It's just a pattern that I've seen. And so, and it's a pattern that plays out every single time. Now, your own distractibility or agitation has a huge effect on your kids, more than we know. And I've been there myself. There was a time when I was depressed, and it was really really uncomfortable for me, really difficult for me to have my stepkids see this in me. I wanted to be a better parent, and I couldn't be. So our own distractibility, our own agitation needs to be addressed by us also. Because remember, ADHD kids are sensitive and want to help. Very compassionate. You may have a child that's very compassionate. That's pretty common with ADHD kids. So it's really important for us to step up and take care of ourselves. That's a really, really good model for our kids to see. And then another distraction is if your kids have had a previous bad experience with, let's say, doing a particular chore, doing a particular exercise, doing homework for a particular class, that's going to be a demotivator. Or if they're a perfectionist, both of those sort of have the child responding, well, I'm going to get a D anyway, so why do it? Or the teacher never likes my work anyway, so what's the point? Or I can't get an A on this, or I can't succeed at this, so why am I doing it? So that's pretty common also. Now, a lot of times I hear from parents, we can't reach our child at all. They don't respond to us. They don't seem to like us anymore. They don't seem to respect us. And I'd like to address that really, really briefly and say that your children love you to distraction. There is nothing that they would rather do than please you. And in the process of growing up, it's normal for kids to want to extend their boundaries and their worlds. And so they're going to look for other people to approve of them and to direct them. Additionally, one of the absolute pluses about being in a family, and a healthy family, is that people do approve of you. People support you and encourage you and believe in you. And after a while, even though that's something that your child can depend on, it can lose its meaning temporarily. And so to have someone from the outside, so to speak, come in and also approve of them and encourage them and believe in them is very, very, very powerful, and can strengthen your relationship with your child, because now your child sees, oh, it's not just something you're saying because you're my parent, it's actually true. So when I go into a family as a coach, when I work with a family, either short-term or long-term, one of the things that happens is that I form a bond with that child. I can give them a more objective view of themselves. And so my encouragement is also viewed as objective, even though I'm super, super, super encouraging. It's still viewed as, well, this is somebody who knows what she's talking about, and she thinks I can do this. She believes in me. And then what happens is the child becomes more successful, and the parents become more successful, and you're all successful together, and you grow closer. So having somebody come in from the outside is not going to disrupt your family. It's actually going to bring your family closer together. Okay, number 3. I want to differentiate between brain capacity and brain capability. We tend to focus just on brain capability. So capability would be the thing that you are able to do because of your intelligence or your sort of natural inclination, your natural skills. And we tend to focus on that, like, okay, my child has a gifted IQ, why can't they empty the dishwasher? That brings us to brain capacity. And brain capacity is the amount of emotional wherewithal that a person has, any person, at a given time to get a particular job done, to do an activity, to attend an event, to handle an emotion for that matter. So this is why somebody could have a gifted IQ and not be able to empty a dishwasher, because of course they have the capability. It's not like it takes a genius to empty a dishwasher, but there is an emotional component that is missing. So for instance, I had a client, and he obviously super smart, super talented athletically, super popular, and has ADHD. So emptying a dishwasher was not, I mean, clearly it was within his brain capability and his physical capability, but he didn't get it done. And so I actually asked him, what is preventing you from getting it done? What is the scenario that would help you get this done? And he said it was lonely in the kitchen when it was time to empty the dishwasher, because it was the end of the day. It was after dinner because all the dinner dishes were put in the dishwasher. Then the dishwasher was run. And then like an hour later, it was his time to empty the dishwasher. And he wanted people around him, which I totally understand. He wanted to be able to talk to people while he was doing this. He wanted to laugh. He wanted some life around him. So simply what we did is rearrange the timing, and there were people around him. We made sure that people were available to be in the kitchen with him, chatting and laughing while he was emptying the dishwasher. Now, this may or may not always be the case, but seriously, it's not that big a deal. If somebody needs to have people around them to get chores done, they'll figure that out. Eventually, your child will be able to figure that out for himself or herself, and you won't have to provide the entertainment, so to speak. And this is true in a lot of different realms. This is true, for instance, you've seen this already with things like talking, walking, or potty training. Your children may have the brain capability to walk and talk and be potty trained, but they may not have the brain capacity depending on how old they are. So we don't usually feel frustrated or put down our kids or say this is ridiculous when our child doesn't talk as soon as another sibling does. Usually we just keep encouraging them. And that's really what we're talking about. Eventually, you don't have to keep encouraging your child to talk. They'll just talk. There won't be any, sort of ritual around making them comfortable and that sort of thing. Same with walking. Same with potty training. When you're potty training your child, they, in the beginning, they want you in there. You got to read to them, sing to them, have music, God knows what, rewards. But, after a while, they don't even want you in there, and they're going to entertain themselves. So that's what's going to happen with things like emptying the dishwasher and other things, other tasks that are more like responsibilities that your child needs to complete. Okay, so number 4, and there are 5. of these things you need to know about motivating your child. Now, number 4 is learn the 3 motivation styles. Now, everybody has these 3 motivation styles. You've got them, I've got them, everybody's got them. And depending on the activity, your child will be more or less engaged, and this can change. So to connect with your child, and the connection will help with motivating them, you need to know what the 3 motivation styles are that everyone has, and you need to know what your child's motivators are. So let's start with the three styles. And the first one is the bird, the baby bird. The second one is a car, and the third one is a hothouse or exotic flower. Okay, so the baby bird is the most motivated style, and we tend to think of this as motivation. Like, this is motivation. You're either this or you're not motivated. This is the scenario where the child, the bird, the person doesn't need any encouragement or support. They're just told to do it and they do it. Or it's time to do whatever, homework, for instance, and they do it. Just like a baby bird is pushed out of the nest and they fly. It's, there's no long discussion about it as far as we know. They don't need their parent to go with them. So it's just very simply like, it's time to do it, let's do it. Now, I'm also going to give you 3 scenarios of former clients so you can see how this plays out in children with ADHD. The first one, though, is the baby bird. They don't need anything from us. It's just, they do it, whatever it is. Okay, the second one is a car. And a car needs some attention. So, a car, when it's on a car lot, it has everything it needs to run. It's got the tires, it's got the transmission, it's got everything it needs to run, but it won't run if it doesn't have gas and if it doesn't have keys, or whatever cars started with nowadays. So it needs some attention. You actually have to put gas in the car. Now, this is the amount of attention that parents are used to giving. We don't necessarily think of it as attention. We think of it as just parenting. So it could be making a snack. It could be making a meal. It could be driving your child somewhere. It could be making sure that they have clean clothes. It could be making sure that they have certain equipment. We don't think of it as motivating our children, but it is, because if you think about it, how are they going to get the thing done? How are they going to participate if they don't have the equipment they need, the food, the fuel that they need to function? How are they going to participate if they can't get to the place without it being a dangerous situation? So this is the middle level. And like I said, this could be just a helping hand, something that we would normally do. Okay, the third level, these are the situations where we need to give a lot of TLC, tender loving care. If you think about a hothouse flower or an exotic flower or a greenhouse flower, these are very rare, very beautiful, very special, and they need a lot of attention in order to thrive. If they're ignored, they just wither. So a hothouse flower does not live in the ground with other flowers. It lives in its own special pot. It may have special soil. It may be fed special food. It is fed special food. Orchid food is not the same as what you give daisies, which is like nothing. They may even have to be fed with an eyedropper to get the proportions correct. The temperature has to be a certain amount. So there are times, many times, when our children just need a lot of TLC to be motivated. And this one tends to drive parents nuts because one of the things we do is internalize it and we become afraid that something's really wrong with our child or with our parenting or with both our child and our parenting. And so that fear translates into frustration, sometimes anger. And instead of frustration and anger, what we need to be doing is paying more attention. And that can look like like we've talked about, making sure they get the right food, making sure they get the right sleep that they need to function, treating your child, those areas where your child needs special attention, giving them that special attention. They may need coaching. They may need medication. They may need certain essential oils. They may need massage. I mean, one of the things about ADHD is that there are so many modalities that potentially work, but the key is to find the modality that's going to work for you and your child. That could be chiropractic. It could be craniosacral therapy. It could be, like I said, it could be massage. The idea is to find what works for your child. And that's part of the TLC also. Now, your child may grow up to be an adult that needs TLC also. And that's okay. One of the things that's really important is to make it okay for your child to ask for help, and make it okay for your child to ask not just you for help, not just the parent, but the siblings or friends or other relatives. The more people that are involved in helping your child, and I'm talking about safe people, not people that are going to put down your child, but the more people that are involved with helping your child and the more experience your child has asking for help, the better off he or she will be as an adult. It's the most useful skill I ever learned was asking for help. I was not taught that that was a good thing. I was taught that people will be repulsed by you if you ask for help because no one wants to be around someone who's weak. In fact, that isn't true. There are tons of people out there who are waiting to be asked for help. And I am one of those people. I love it when people connect with me and have a question about ADHD. I love it when people want to talk to me and get strategies. I love that. So what I've learned is that there are always people out there who will help your child, even when they're an adult. Okay, so let's talk about some examples of some situations, some real people, and how this bird car hothouse flower plays out. So this is Ron, not really, and it's not even his name, but I always change the names and I never use the real pictures because anonymity is, I hold confidentiality and anonymity sacred. So Ron is 10 years old. Ron loves coding. You do not have to say, it's time for you to code, or how about doing some coding? He loves coding. He will code all day long. And he's so good at it that people have started asking if he'll make a simple app for them. And for somebody that loves coding and can do it, a simple app is a wonderful challenge. Okay, so here's the car level. Now this is the level where he has everything inside him to get this done, but he needs some support. So he takes piano lessons. He likes it. He knows it's important in his family because his mother is a pianist, and so he gets that it's a value. But it's really not his favorite thing. He can do it. He can take the lessons. He can practice, but it's not his favorite thing. So his mother has made it more fun by turning it into an event. And so how it works is she picks him up at school, she gives him a snack. And that could be a granola bar, it could be an apple, just a snack. She drives him to the lesson. She sits and does something else and doesn't focus on him during the lesson. She doesn't contribute to the lesson at all. It's just between Ron and his piano teacher. And then after the piano lesson, they always have this ritual of getting French fries. And that's the only time that they have French fries, is after a piano lesson. Now, the second part of this is not just the lesson, but the practicing. And the rule that Ron made up was that his mother can't bug him about any mistakes that he's making while he's practicing. He knows that, from 4 to 4:30, he practices piano, or whatever time it is. And his mother may be in the room, or she may not be in the room. She may be at work, but she is not allowed to bug him about playing perfectly. She can ask if he practiced, but that's it. Now, Ron is an exceptionally wonderful child. All of my clients are really wonderful, frankly. Not everybody knows it, but I know it. So he's brilliant, and he has particular talents. And then he has some things he's not that good at. And one of them is reading. He's just not a reader. But he will pretty much do anything if his parents or his dog cuddle with him. He likes soft blankets. He loves hugs and cuddling, and he loves hot chocolate. Now, when I first started working with this family, and we worked via Skype, which was awesome because a lot of times I'll go to a person's home if they're local, and that really helps me see them, the whole family, in their environment. If I don't live in their area, or if they don't live where I live, we use Skype because I can still see them in their environment, and it works for people. I mean, I've coached people in Australia, New Zealand, Amsterdam, Canada, all over the world. I'm in Seattle, FYI. So when I first started working with them, Ron would sit at the kitchen counter and he would read that way. And it was really distracting because a lot goes on in a kitchen, and the kitchen counter isn't super comfortable. So he had his hot chocolate, but the rest of it wasn't warm and fuzzy. And he's all about warm and fuzzy. So we switched his reading place, and he didn't want to be in his bedroom because it's not a public enough place. He felt isolated. So he reads in the living room. He's got the blankets. He's got that hot chocolate. He's got his dog, and he's got his parents. So that's how we switched it up. Sometimes it's not a huge deal. It's just asking your child what they need and then responding to what they say. Okay, so Lilly, I worked with in 11th and 12th grade. And when I met her, she was 16. She was in 11th and 12th grade, not me. Okay, so again, a student with ADHD. She was very into yoga and meditation. And she was so into it that you did not even have to tell her that you didn't have to wake her up. You didn't have to do anything. She would get herself up early. She would attend a 6 a.m. yoga class every single day, Sunday through Saturday. And she was like that baby bird. It was like the alarm goes off and she's up and she's getting herself ready, and she goes to yoga class. She actually got most of her readiness done the night before, so all she needed to do was put on her yoga clothes and go. Now, what I'm telling you is that she got most of her organization done early, and some of that organization was supported by her mother. So there were tasks that needed to be done, so that all Lily had to do in the morning was go to yoga. So she needed a lunch. She needed to have a pill ready for after yoga class. She needed water for the day. She needed to make sure that her clothes were clean, what she was going to wear to yoga. She needed to make sure there was a change of clothes. So her mom and her and she, they were the ones together. They would make sure that she was organized for the next day. And sometimes that meant just her mom, because sometimes Lily was doing homework. Now, that being said, her mother would also, after the yoga class was over, every day her mom would text her and ask how class was and remind her to take her medication. Because you can forget. Kids do forget at times. Now, wonderful girl. Wonderful, wonderful girl. But she could not keep track of appointments to save her life. So, for instance, she was supposed to call me at 7:45 every evening. Now, they would have dinner. That family had dinner at 7. Sorry, she was supposed to call me at 8. I'm sorry. That family had dinner, and they were super close. They were a really, really close family. And they had 5 kids of varying ages, and the older kids had started having babies, so it was getting to be a bigger family. So they were the kind of family that liked to sit around the table and keep talking. So we set an alarm for her to call me at 8. It went off at 7:45, and she heard it, but by the time it was 8, she would forget to call me. So this is the way we arranged it. Okay, she's supposed to call me at 8 p.m. Now I would probably call her, but at some point it's important to train your child, like especially when they're headed for college, train them to respond to the alarms on their phones. So the first alarm went off at 7:45. That was the alarm that said, okay, you are shortly going to be transitioning from family time to calling your coach. So the first alarm just was sort of a life is going to change, just letting you know. The second alarm was 10 minutes later, and that alarm was, it's time to get up, put your dishes in the dishwasher, clean up whatever you need to clean up. So at this point, it's 5 to 8. If you have to go to the bathroom, do that. Whatever it's going to be, you need to get up and get ready. The third alarm went off at the time she was supposed to call. So when that third alarm went off, she knew it was time to call me. So there's no lag time at all. And this is perfectly acceptable. You may know from experience or from your reading that ADHD kids have trouble with transitions. And this kind of 3 alarm strategy helps to make the transition easier and smoother. And it helps her to get what she needs to do done. And it helps the person she's working with make sure they're actually working with her. So eventually we put everything into her phone, and we made sure that there were as many alarms as she needed. And some people, for some things, need more. And for some things, she didn't need a lot. It was just, and some alarms were like, it's time to take a shower. And that alarm wasn't because she would forget to take a shower necessarily, or she didn't value a shower, but because in addition to being distracted, we can also have hyperfocus. And so sometimes we're so involved in what we're doing that we lose track of time. And so this was something that said, okay, stop what you're doing, take your shower, you can come back to it, sort of thing. Okay, here's Maya. She's 6 years old. Maya loves to read. She can read on her own. She knows how to read, and she can pick out her own books. You can turn her loose in a library and she'll get her books. She loves reading. You don't need to do anything to get her to read. She hates housework, but she loves being active. So what her mom did was turn the housework into an obstacle course. There were like step stools, placed in the middle of the floor for her, middle of the room for her to climb. There were things to jump over. She timed certain activities. And the cool thing is that not only is the housework getting done, not only is Maya getting some exercise, but she's also learning about time management because her mother is timing her. A lot of kids with ADD and ADHD, and a lot of adults, do not have a concept of time. And those people without ADHD that really have time management under their belts don't think about what it takes to understand time. And one of the things that parents whatout ADHD don't understand is that time happens as it's moving along in whatever scientific realm this is called, like as it gets to be from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m., that's time. But also time occurs as a bodily sensation. There is a physical component to understanding time and internalizing the passing of time. And that's what a lot of ADHD kids don't have. They don't have an actual connection with time. It's not internalized. And so that's why they have trouble with it. So the more times you can use timers and, have races and against the person themselves, not necessarily a competition with somebody else. Like that is one way to teach time management. Anyway, I digress. As a hothouse flower, Maya hasn't learned many social skills yet. So her mom really has to have a part in social situations. Because Maya will say things that she doesn't mean, or she'll say them in a way she doesn't mean. And she doesn't do well with groups of people. She does better one-on-one. So her mom makes sure that she talks to Maya's friends' moms before a play date. If there's a party, they strategize. Sometimes the mom goes to the play dates for now. I mean, Maya's 6, or the parties. Sometimes the strategy is that Maya goes to a different room when she's feeling overwhelmed. Sometimes it means she's going home. And they work out a way where Maya can feel good about herself. She doesn't have to be embarrassed that, there's a slumber party, but maybe she just doesn't want to stay over. Maybe that's going to be a problem for her. So she doesn't have to feel embarrassed about it, and she can learn to take care of herself. Okay, now, your job, remember we talked about what makes a successful parent. So what you're going to do is you're going to be observing your child and helping your child as if you were an executive assistant. You don't do the work for the CEO, you are the assistant. So you make sure that that the child is the CEO of their own life. But when they're younger, they need more executive assistant help. And as they get older, they'll need less and less. But somebody will need to be their executive assistant. Even if it's a friend or a group of friends or a phone reminder. Luckily, there are so many apps to help out. It's easier to be an adult with ADHD nowadays. So the executive assistant would make sure that the executive, your child, has the supplies they need. The executive assistant keeps the schedule. The executive assistant reminds the boss of what the schedule is. The executive assistant, their job is to not run the company. So you're not doing the work for your child, but you're providing physical support in terms of where they do their studying or their chores. Is it going to be conducive to them getting it done? And also encouragement. So you don't do the work for them, but you can do the work next to them. And if they have a learning disability, you can give them a start, but then they have to complete the work. So let me give you some examples. So in one family I worked with early on, there was a son, and he was really, really, really good at getting his work done alone in his bedroom. Now, this family had, I don't know how many kids, like 6 or 7. I'm not sure. There were a lot. And the mom's vision of a good functioning family was that all the kids were around the dining room table after dinner and they were all doing their homework together. The problem was that he couldn't work in that environment. He couldn't get his work done. And it was very distracting. And the mom was busy trying to make him fit this dream of hers, which is a lovely dream. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that dream. He could get A's doing the work alone in his room, and he couldn't, and he was disruptive and irritating when he was working with the family, sitting around the dining room table. So I went over there, and kind of early on, I watched him work. And this is something you can do. I went to his environment and I watched him work. And every so often I'd ask a question, like a clarification question, but not much. I was trying to be very unobtrusive. What I noticed is that he had this rock, not a rock, bigger than a rock. It was probably in circumference, it was probably about 12 inches and maybe 15 inches. And it was on the floor. And it was like a fidget, but he fidgeted with his feet. So you've heard of these fidgets that people, kids, and they hold in their hands, and maybe it's a ball that they squeeze, or maybe it's a sort of a rubber band that they stretch. And it is really good for kids that have trouble with focus, because it focuses one part of the brain and lets the other part of the brain do the task. So he used this rock as a fidget. And that's how he was able to get work done. So we had two choices. We could leave him to get his work done. In other words, let him do it in his room. Or we could create another space, maybe not at the table, maybe near the family, in the great room, for instance, and bring his fidget down. And that's what they decided to do. And it worked. They brought his fidget down, and he sat near the family, but not with the family at the same table, and he got his work done. So the executive assistant of a company is also a problem solver. And you may be that problem solver along with your child. It's really important to problem solve with your child so that they can understand problem solving. What is the mechanism behind solving a problem? How does the brain go about solving a problem? So now, let's say your child has a learning disability and really needs more attention than just, I'm going to sit there and watch you do the work. So one of the things you could do, for instance, let's say your child has a problem with math. One of the things you can do is do all the work together, like you're doing the work with them. And then after that's done, they get a fresh piece of paper and they start to do it on their own until they can do the assignment on their own. It takes longer, and it'll be frustrating at first for everybody, but this is you being their executive assistant, not doing the work for them, but doing the work with them. Same thing with reading. If your child has trouble with reading, they can have a copy of the book and you can have a copy of the book, and you can read the book and they follow along, or you read a page and they read a page, depending on their age and their capability level, and their capacity level. I had a student that was in 7th grade, but he did reading and writing at a 1st grade level. So for reading, we would do, he would read 2 paragraphs and I'd read 2 paragraphs. And I'm saying reading would practically put him in a meltdown. I mean, it was so terrifying for him to read, because it's hard being in 7th grade and, having a 1st grade reading level. And in some cases, there are 1st grades that really don't expect a lot of reading from their kids. So with writing, what we would do is the following. So we'd have a question that he needed to answer about what we read. And what is the strongest characteristic about this character or something like that. And so he would tell me his answer and I would write it down and I would read it to him, and he could change any part of it that I didn't get right, that would reflect his thinking. I would give him the paper and then he would copy what I wrote down onto his own paper. Again, they were his thoughts, they were his corrections, and ultimately it was his writing that got turned in. For some kids, that kind of intervention is really important. Okay, now, what is your child motivated by? Here's what typically ADHD kids are motivated by. So fun and interesting things, activities, events. So you can ask, what would make this more fun? Or what would make this more interesting? Like we asked the boy that wasn't emptying the dishwasher, what would make this more fun? What would make this more interesting? You can do the same thing with kids waking up in the morning and getting out of bed. One, how old was she? She was in middle school. I think she was 12, maybe 13. And she was really into science fiction and fantasy. So she had trouble getting up in the morning, like many, many kids do, and adults. And so we tried to, talk to her about what would make this more fun or interesting. And she was given the quote unquote assignment to think about that between that day and the next time I was going to be talking to her. And she came up with the idea that getting up in the morning was like a quest, like a fantasy quest. And so every morning when the alarm would go off, she would say, for those of you that are familiar with The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, she would say to herself, if Frodo and Sam can get the ring to Mordor, then I can get up today. And it was humorous and it worked really well for her. Now, I'm guessing that it wore out its welcome at some point and she needed to come up with something else. But kids with ADHD are never at a loss for ideas. If you give them the opportunity to create, they will take that opportunity. ADHD kids are also motivated by power and freedom. I'm not talking about no boundaries, no requirements, no rules at all. And I'm not talking about overpowering people, but giving them a little taste of power and freedom is really, really helpful. And just a little taste of it so you can see whether they can handle it or not. If they can't handle it, you can always pull back. If you've given them a ton of freedom, it's really hard to pull back if they can't handle it. One of the things I've done before is say, you know, if you get your chores done for a week with no complaining and no reminding, you get to be in charge of the family for a day. And usually I define, and I do this for little kids and for teens, but I define you get to run the family. So to me, that means you get to pick the activities the family does, and you can pick the meals. It doesn't mean you get to tell people what to do. It just means you get to be in charge of what activities everybody does and where you eat or what you eat. Kids really like that. ADHD kids also like people doing things for them. So you can say like, you know, you've been really helpful this week. You've been really attentive. You've been really on task. I'm going to do your chores tomorrow. Or I'm going to do one of your chores tomorrow. Something like that they will definitely take that in. That will mean a lot to them. Now, I'm a positive discipline trainer, and praise is not usually recommended. However, I look at it as one of my friends says, what you notice matters. So, you know, a lot of times we think, why should we thank people, or why should we tell them they did a good job when they did something they were supposed to do anyway? And I think that we do that so that they know we're noticing them. I once was working in the lunchroom, and I decided that I was going to thank all the kids for throwing out their trash. Thank you for throwing out your trash. Thank you for throwing out your trash. They thought I was crazy, but some of them gave me a smile, and some of them said, you're welcome. And they all knew that I noticed them, and that I noticed that they were doing something right or good, or whatever you want to call it, helpful. I think that's important. So like last night, I had a client and he got all his homework done without me even prompting him. And I said, you know, right on, that's awesome. And we high-fived each other. I don't think that's a problem. Good attention and special time with you. Kids love that. You know, being able to play catch or go to a meal with just you, or being able to have time to talk to you alone. That's really important for kids. They tell me that all the time. They love spending time with their parents, believe it or not. It's really important to them. And then, as I mentioned before, high fives, smiles, and hugs. I'm all about those. I also tend to say, right on, or you did it, or good job, or something like that. I happen to be pretty enthusiastic, So that's part of who I am, but you don't have to be as enthusiastic as I am to motivate your child. So to summarize, the gist of the whole thing is that you want to meet your kids where they are now, where they are today. You don't want to parent their potential. You don't want to parent who you want them to be in the future, because that's not where they are. When you have an ADHD kid, they are living very much in the present. And things like, well, you won't get into UCLA, or you won't get into Harvard, or you won't get into whatever, is not particularly motivating for most ADHD kids. Most ADHD kids will shut down when you say stuff like that. So parent them where they are now. It's not that you don't talk about the future or your dreams or their dreams. It's just that you parent them who they are and where they are. And I really like this Albert Einstein quote that pretty much sums up what I'm trying to say. Everyone is a genius, but if you judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid.